Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. In this episode, we're going to do vocal mixing basics. In our last episode, we balanced the mix using just panning and volume. That's all we did. And that got the mix to a place where we could start making better decisions. In this episode, we're going to look at some really subtle ways that you can make your vocals sit better in the mix, just using compression and automation. This automation in Pro Tools, of course, could be clip automation, but it could also be volume automation in your DAW. So let's just solo and listen to that vocal.
Even when I'm holding gray, and all my mind has slipped away from me.
It's a little uneven. It is compressing on the way in. There was some compression applied, but not very much at all. So it's pretty typical probably to something you would record yourself. So the first thing I'm going to do is just going to grab some gentle compression. So we're going to keep it stock. So we're going to go to one of Avid's compressors. Before I do anything, I'm going to press play and see what the default sounds like.
Even when I'm holding gray, and all my mind has slipped away from me.
So it's grabbing it pretty hard on some of that higher level stuff. Let's go to the second phrase here. The reason why I want to listen to the second phrase is because the second half of the second phrase is super quiet.
And all my mind has slipped away from me.
So it's barely compressing, but it's giving me about 3 dB on this even. So why don't we set the threshold so it's barely doing anything on this?
From me, from me, from me, from me.
So there you go. I set the threshold here, so that just went through. So there's no perceptible volume change whatsoever. Now let's listen to the whole phrase.
And all my mind has slipped away from me. And all my mind has slipped away from me. And all my mind has slipped away from me. And all my mind has slipped away from me.
Great. So now that last phrase just passes through and the compression has been applied really just to the loud stuff. And I have not touched anything. I left it on the default just to see what it's got. So basically we've got a 3-to-1 ratio. What does that mean? It means that every single time it goes 3 dB over the threshold, it lets 1 dB through. 20-to-1 would be like limiting because it means it would take 20 dB to go over the threshold just to let only 1 dB go through. Hopefully that makes sense. It does confuse beginners and I totally understand. Actually, there's people I know that use compressors that don't even know what the ratio does. So let's have a listen with that now in context.
Even when I'm holding gray, and all my mind has slipped away from me.
So now I like what it's doing, but I'm tempted to actually use serial compression, so use another compressor. That's evened it out, but I want it to be just a little bit more forward, so what I might do now is grab something else. Now, this is a time where you might want to grab something with a lot of personality, maybe something that's a little gritty, something that adds a little color. That's where the emulations start to become very popular. But what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do that at first. I'm going to stick with the stock stuff. So I'm actually happy to use that same compressor, but with a different ratio. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to go more aggressive. We're going to whack up the ratio, 20.1 to 1, close enough. And I'm going to take this threshold, as you see over here on the left-hand side, and take it really super high, and then start bringing it in so it grabs the peaks.
even when I'm old and gray, and all my mind has slipped away from me. Promise you'll be by my side and we'll, even when I'm old and gray, and all my mind has slipped away from me. Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
It's a lot more even now. I'm hearing the compression. Do you hear that? It starts to feel like it's grabbing it a little. So let's do something. Let's listen in bypass.
Even when I'm old and gray.
Now let's put it back on.
Even when I'm old and gray.
It's definitely helping. I'm going to bring up the gain here.
Even when I'm old and gray.
Let's put it in the track.
Even when I'm old and gray, and all my mind has slipped away from me. Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
Now, you can see what the compression is doing. It's evening out all of those phrases. Now, there's other ways to do this. In this DAW, in Pro Tools, we could get in there and we could actually clip gain some stuff. So we could say, well, okay, this phrase here is a little quiet. So we could separate it out and then we can actually turn it up. Each DAW has different versions of that, but you see it just got turned up. So if we have a listen down again.
Even when I'm old and gray, and all my mind has slipped away from me. Promise you'll be.
Like that promise really seems like it's like really in the back of his throat. So why don't we just get in there and go here, separate it out, turn that up. And then what's great is we can also go in and put a nice fade here. Let's have a listen to that.
Away from me. Promise you'll be by my side and
already starting to sound more even.
even when I'm.
See on that even when I'm, that feels like it could do it just a little bit of love. So let's just go in here, separate that section, turn it up, and then drag it back here and put a nice fade in over here and have a listen to this.
Even when I'm old and gray.
You see here how some of this detail work can really do wonders for you. Now, there's a lot of people that advocate, and I do too, with serial compression. You hear it from so many of the older guys and girls, that, you know, producers, engineers, and mixers. They use tons of compression, especially when they were mixing only on consoles. They would have maybe the SSL bus compression. They would also insert LA2As and 1176s. You know, there's some very famous producers that are using tons and tons of compression. I've been in a room and seen compressors going like crazy. However, it was very, very difficult to do this kind of detail automation now. On an old school console like an SSL, which of course I still own one of those, you can get on the fader. So here on the console, for instance, you see it says lead vocal, lead voc. And I could sit there and as the vocal was playing, like ride every syllable. And that has been done and will continue to be done by people using, you know, consoles like this. However, the detail stuff is really, really super time consuming. And most of the mixers that you know that are mixing on consoles, I don't see that kind of detail. And I'm talking probably only a guy like Mark Ender do you ever see like this kind of detail where the fader is moving all over the place. So most of the time, they are employing a huge amount of compression across the vocal to achieve that, which is why a lot of mixers have a sound of like the way that everything's very upfront and always on. There's famous, you know, mixers that we know that use an L1, a limiter on a vocal before it even hits their console. And so the vocal's like this with no dynamic in it. And that's a big part of like modern pop and rock, like that vocal super upfront. However, this kind of detail is quite refreshing because what it's doing is it is allowing you, by using the clip gain or you could even do this with volume going into compression, you are not using compression necessarily as coloring. Most people are using compression to color the sound, as well as making sure that it is always in your face and up front. This is detailed work that you may or may not want to do, but you can see it's doing a lot of great things.
Even when I'm holding late.
See, for me, thinking in this way, I just want to grab that phrase there and turn it up.
Even when I'm holding late.
And listen to the end of that phrase, the way he's
Hey.
kind of nice. So you could get in there and crank the end of that up like this.
Holding gray.
Little squeak in his voice. I actually like it. It's personality. The ends of phrases can really, really give us a lot of personality and charisma.
Even when I'm holding late. And all my mind has slipped away from me.
That from me, for instance, at the very end of that, that's really nice as well. So that, even though it's already been clip gain, could be clip gain some more. We could come in here and just do this.
From me.
See that in solo, just to illustrate it.
From me. Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
So that's the kind of detail that we're looking at on a vocalist. Getting in there. Yes, compression will help. And it can solve the problem. I mean, I could literally go in there if I wanted to and grab something super aggressive. Like, let's go for the L1. Let's go for that, that tool here. So this is a limiter, an L1 created by waves.
Even when I'm holding gray. And all my mind has slipped away from me. Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
It's doing some great stuff. I mean, it's bringing out those breaths, and which you may want to bring down, or breaths. But what it's doing is it's bringing out some all of that personality out of the vocal. Let's have a listen to it in context.
Even when I'm holding gray. And all my mind has slipped away from me. Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
But even then, my ear tells me I want to hear a little bit more of this phrase. So let's bring that up a little bit. We'll put a bit of a fade in there. What's interesting is that's an S sound, so I probably don't want to bring that up too much because I'm going to end up having to put a de-esser if I bring up those. So be careful when you're doing like clip gain or volume automation that you're not exaggerating things that you've got to then take out afterwards.
Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
See, for instance, there's a big
Promise you'll be.
show me there, which I'd already brought up. So why don't I bring that over there? See what's happened? Here's the before, where I brought up that side. Now I can go over here and bring my fade so it's there. And I'm no longer exaggerating that S.
Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
It's great. So there you saw 3 different ways of doing this. There's compression and serial compression. And then, of course, clip gain or volume automation, because you could do this by actually just applying volume automation. And then a limiter on the end. And all of those are bringing the vocal forward. You've got to be careful and use your ears at all time to make sure it doesn't sound choked. Compressors have this ugly habit of, when they get too aggressive, of making it go, and it chokes out the sound, even when, and it removes the personality and makes it feel squashed. And that's when people will say it sounds, quote unquote, too compressed. It's less about being too compressed and more about being compressed badly. Here's an after.
Even when I'm holding gray. And all my mind has slipped away from me.
Okay, and then let's go to a before.
Even when I'm holding back.
So even though the volume there on the vocal's different, I can bring it up so it's a little louder. You can hear those words disappearing.
Even when I'm holding back, and all my mind has slipped away from me.
Listen to the after.
Even when I'm holding back, and all my mind has slipped away from me. Promise you'll be by my side and we'll.
So there, I think the buy sounds like it's hitting the compressor a little bit too hard. So strangely enough, I might actually use the clip gain to do the opposite. So I might bring this down a little bit. There you go. So when it hits the compressor, it's not buy, it doesn't feel like it's squashing it too heavily. Now, a lot of this is really subtle when you're first starting. And so I imagine a lot of this can feel quite confusing because the differences are very, very subtle at times, and other times they seem quite drastic. But ultimately, you're listening for the vocal to make sure that it feels like it's always present in the mix. It can be massively compressed and limited and then immediately be present. It can be so unbelievably bright and then immediately present. However, when you're working on a song, whatever you do on one instrument, you have to start doing to everything else. What do I mean by that? I mean, like, if I make my drum sound so unbelievably massive and aggressive, everything else is going to feel tiny against it. Suddenly my bass head has to be massive and aggressive, and maybe I have to add like a ton of a distortion to help it, like, glue together with those drums. And then the same thing with the guitars. This may not be a problem. That might be your end result. Maybe you want it to be just this huge, pumping, massive rock song. That's great. With a song like this, which is fairly acoustic and has live drums and background vocals, a piano as opposed to like synths and all kinds of other programmed elements, we have to be careful. We want everything to feel balanced. So it's very, very important in mixing to think that way. What is the end result? That's why in this instance, I think it was very smart for us to get into the vocals. So I hope you enjoyed that. Really, really basic stuff. However, you can see that it now sits so much better in the mix. It means that we're not reaching for like EQs and all kinds of other crazy stuff yet. We're keeping this very, very simplistic, and we'll be able to make better decisions in our mixing process. What do you normally do now? Where do you go from here? Please let us know in the comments and questions below. Of course, hit the like button, subscribe, and you can go to Produce Like a Pro and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies.